Junior Soprano was the boss. Silvio Dante was the consigliere. So who was the underboss? 25 years into the Sopranos discourse, and that one question still splits the fan base. You'll hear Paulie, Bobby, Christopher, and some people who'll tell you the show never had one at all. The honest answer is that every one of those takes has real evidence behind it, and every one of them has holes you could drive a Cadillac through. Let me walk you through it. To make sense of the underboss question, you have to grasp what kind of operation the DeMeo crime family actually was. In Goodfellas, in The Godfather, and pretty much every mafia story you've ever seen, the hierarchy stays rigid. Boss, underboss, consigliere, capos, soldiers. Clean lines drawn on a chalkboard. The DeMeo family ran on something looser than that. When Phil Leotardo is plotting to wipe them out in the penultimate episode, he repeats a line he says Carmine Lupertazzi always used about the Sopranos, that they were nothing more than a glorified crew. Smaller, looser, more improvised. That official 5-tier structure was designed for the 1950s New York Mafia, and the DeMeos were running a New Jersey operation in the era of FBI wiretaps, RICO indictments, and rats around every corner. So the rules got fluid, the titles got blurry. David Chase leaned into that ambiguity throughout the series, which is why pinning down a single underboss is so hard. The show gives us 4 legitimate candidates across the seasons, and each one has a real claim. Let me take you through them, one at a time. Before Tony was running anything, the DeMeo family already had an underboss. His name was Joseph Sasso, and you'd be forgiven for not remembering him. He has barely any dialogue across the whole series. He gets arrested in the season 1 finale, I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano, pulled out of his house by federal agents in the same FBI sweep that takes down Junior and Larry Boy Barisi. That's the entire Beppe Sasso arc. One raid, one final shot, and he's gone from the show. But that single FBI bust tells you something important. The DeMeo family did have a traditional named underboss, and he served under Junior during the period when Junior was the official boss. When the indictments came down at the end of season 1, the entire administrative tier of the family got wiped out in a single night. Junior, Larry Boy, Beppe, all of them, hauled away on the same evening. Beppe is never seen or referenced again. Tony walks into season 2 as the de facto leader of an organization whose boss is heading to a federal courtroom, whose underboss has vanished into the system, and whose succession plan no longer exists on paper. He has to rebuild the administration from scratch, and the question is whether he ever actually finishes the job. Because what happens next is where this all gets murky. This is where most fans land, and it's the most fiercely debated answer in the entire fandom. Paulie Walnuts. Here's the case the show makes for him. Season 2, Episode 5, Big Girls Don't Cry. A few episodes after Tony's trip to Naples, he pulls Paulie aside and tells him a new guy named Furio is coming over from Italy. Then comes the line every fan theorist quotes. Him coming over is good. You're getting a bump. And he lays out the new chain of command. It's me, then you and Sil together. That's the new pecking order. Pussy reports to you guys. Directly. Same with Furio. Read that carefully, because this is where the confusion starts. Paulie wasn't a captain before this scene. He was a soldier in Tony's old crew. The bump Tony is giving him is to capo of that crew, since Tony has just stepped up to acting boss, and his old captain spot needed to be filled. That's the textually clean reading. Paulie gets promoted to capo. The complication is that pecking order line. Me, then you and Sil together, is the sentence Paulie as underboss theorists hang their entire argument on. Because in a traditional mafia structure, the man directly below the boss, alongside the consigliere, is the underboss. Tony has just verbally placed Paulie in that role without ever using the actual word for it. And the show doubles down on this years later. In season 4, Tony pulls Christopher aside and tells him he's the future of the family. Christopher pushes back, asking what about Silvio? You got that with him and Paulie. Tony's response is, those other guys, Sil, Paulie, one thing they're not. They're not my blood. Tony is naming his 2 trusted senior associates by name, Silvio and Paulie. 2 men, 3 administrative slots. The boss is Tony. The consigliere is Silvio, which leaves exactly 1 position those names could be filling. Here's what drives fans crazy. The show never spells it out. Tony never introduces Paulie as my underboss to anyone. There's no ceremony, no moment where the title gets conferred on screen. Even the canonical Sopranos wikis can't agree on this. Some list Paulie as nominally holding the underboss title in season 6. Others have him down as a capo the whole way through. The text stays deliberately open. There's a strategic reading for why Chase might have written it this way, which is that Tony being vague was Tony being smart. Naming an official underboss meant handing the FBI a direct chain of command for a RICO prosecution. So Tony gave Paulie the responsibility, gave Paulie the seat at the table, and never quite gave him the title. And then, slowly, he started taking the responsibility back. Season 3, Episode 11, Pine Barrens. The episode every Sopranos fan can quote line for line. Paulie and Christopher get lost in the Jersey woods, chasing a Russian who refuses to die. The Russian disappears. The episode becomes a fan favorite, and the wound it opens in Tony and Paulie's relationship never really closes. Tony's anger after that night runs deeper than the botch job itself. What sets him off is the pattern around it. Paulie has spent the entire third season questioning Tony's decisions, complaining about kicking up to anyone who'll listen, generally giving off the low-grade insubordination of a man who thinks he could do this better himself. Pine Barrens was the final straw on a back that was already breaking. From that moment forward, watch the show carefully. Tony stops including Paulie in major decisions. He starts pulling Christopher aside instead. Christopher gets the big sit-downs with New York. Christopher gets the apprenticeship Paulie used to have. Paulie notices, and Paulie reacts. He starts taking lunches with Johnny Sack, complaining about Tony to people outside the family, building lines of communication where lines of communication shouldn't exist. Then, he gets arrested in Youngstown, Ohio on a gun charge between seasons 3 and 4, and spends 4 months in a federal lockup. When he comes back, he's a diminished figure, still a capo, still running his crew, still in the room, but never again the man Tony reaches for first. The way the underboss role functions in this family is part of what makes it so slippery. A traditional mafia underboss carries the title formally, with a fixed weight to it. Under Tony, the role behaves more like a temporary assignment. You've got it until Tony stops reaching for you, and there's no demotion ceremony when that day comes. Paulie holds the responsibility, loses Tony's trust, never gets formally demoted, and never quite gets the keys back. Christopher gets groomed in his place. Then, Christopher's heroin relapse triggers the car crash in Kennedy and Heidi. Tony pinches his nephew's nose shut and kills him personally on the side of the road. And the apprenticeship ends in one of the most brutal scenes of the entire series, which means Tony, finally, has to actually name somebody. By season 6, the answer is Bobby Bacala, the walking calzone, the widower turned captain turned heir apparent. The official moment is buried in plain sight in season 6, episode 13, Soprano Home Movies. Tony and Carmela head up to Bobby and Janice's lake house for Tony's birthday weekend, and the episode features 2 of the most memorable scenes in the back half of the series. The drunken Monopoly fistfight, where Bobby actually beats Tony into the carpet, and the philosophical conversation about death, where Bobby muses that you probably don't even hear it when it happens. After all of that, Tony hands Bobby a job. Partly out of strategic need, partly out of bruised ego from the fight, he tells Bobby to fly to Montreal and execute a French-Canadian man as part of a pharmaceutical deal. Bobby does it. It's his first kill, and almost immediately after, Tony promotes him to underboss. From that point in the show, you can watch the choreography of every scene shift. Every administrative meeting, Bobby is there. Every sit-down with New York, Bobby is in the car. Every major strategic decision, Tony is talking to Bobby. The smoking gun appears in the penultimate episode. When Phil Leotardo decides to wipe out the DeMeo administration, he doesn't go for the whole organization. He tells his lieutenants Butchie and Albie to handle it. In his exact words, "We decapitate and we do business with whatever's left." When Butchie and Albie sit down with their own subordinates to plan the actual hits, the 3 names they settle on are Tony, Silvio, and Bobby. Butchie lays out the logic in one line. They got redundant upper management, bleeds off half the kick. We take 'em out, absorb the whole fucking thing. 3 positions, 3 targets. The boss, the consigliere, and the third one, the one nobody on screen ever quite says out loud, underboss. What's haunted fans for almost 20 years is who's missing from that list. New York settles on Tony, Bobby, and Silvio. Nobody names Paulie. And in the chaos of the final stretch, Bobby gets gunned down in a model train shop, while reaching for a vintage Blue Comet engine. Silvio gets shot in the Bing's parking lot, leaving with Patsy and ends up in a coma the doctors don't expect him to wake up from. And Tony walks into a diner with his family for what may or may not be his last meal. Paulie is alive, sitting outside Satrial's in the sun, the last underboss-shaped figure in the entire DeMeo organization, if there ever really was one, and the only one who walks away from the whole thing. So who was the underboss? The honest answer is one that nobody really wants to hear, because it doesn't give you the clean payoff a question like this is supposed to have. The answer is all of them, at different times, in different ways. Joseph Sasso was the underboss when the show opened, and was gone before the story really started. Paulie functioned as Tony's number 2 in spirit from season 2 through Pine Barrens, got named in pecking order conversations alongside Silvio, and never carried the formal title on screen. Christopher was being trained for the chair, but never lived to take it. Tony killed him before that could happen. Bobby was the underboss in fact, in function, and in formal promotion by the time the series ended. The DeMeo family never had a stable underboss in the first place. What it had was an underboss-shaped hole, and a rotating cast of men Tony shoved into that hole whenever the situation demanded one. Even the fan canon sources can't agree on the timeline. The wikis literally contradict each other on basic dates. That kind of ambiguity is the show's whole thesis baked into a single role. Organized crime in the 21st century has very little in common with Don Corleone holding court in a leather chair anymore. By the time this story is set, the mob looks more like a paranoid suburban guy in a polo shirt, running a smaller and smaller operation, avoiding titles because titles get you indicted. The DeMeo family was dying, and a dying family doesn't need administrative continuity. What it needs is somebody left standing when the dust settles. Tony Soprano's real underboss was an empty seat at the table all along, a position he kept fluid on purpose. Because in his world, the second you give someone the title, you give the FBI a target, and you give the man underneath you a reason to start counting the days. Now I want to hear from you. If you had to put one name on that empty chair, Paulie, Bobby, Silvio, or Christopher, who was Tony's real number 2? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's argue about it.